Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Juval Hub podcast. I'm your host, Jonathan Sarr. We are on part 2 of our amazing series with Dr. Debbie Phillips, who is the foremost authority in all things building your career in property management. It's a journey. Part 1, we talked about what that lattice looked like. Now we're going to focus a bit more specifically on continuing education. But first of all, Dr. Debbie, thank you for being available for this series. Nice to have you back on the show today.
Well, thank you, Jonathan. I'm very passionate about this topic because I believe in lifelong learning. I believe in professional development. And whether you are just starting out your career or you're thinking about changing careers, I talk about career changers. Professional development and continuing education is absolutely imperative.
Yes, there's no such thing as education completion. You may
Right.
complete a module, but there's always more modules to get engaged with. So yeah, I'm with you. Such an active phrase, continuing education. So what's your perspective then? Let's get the conversation started with why is it so critical in our professional growth? When we think back to your career lattice, that visual, where does continuing education come into play?
Well, everything obviously is changing at, breakneck pace. So, number one, it's just the natural speed of business. We have to continue to learn and to grow. One of my favorite leaders of all time, he said, when you're green, you grow, and when you're ripe, you rot. You always want to continue to grow and participate in continuing education. So I think one of the things that I'd also like to think about is when I put two resumes side by side, and maybe they have similar experience, I'm always going to put a plus by the person's name that has demonstrated that they care about their own professional development, that they've attended a course, that they've achieved a professional designation. So I don't care if it's anything from a certificate to a formal degree. Continuing education is going to give you a competitive edge.
Yes, absolutely. So let's dive a bit deeper into that then. So what, because we talked a bit about mentoring in part 1. So now we're trying to move through our career lattice. What would you recommend? So we did foundation. We talked about some resources like NAA and NMHC, IRM. Now where do we go? What would you recommend is a particular path or a program to get a certification of some sort? Do you have any examples you'd like to share?
I do. And one thing that I want to encourage our listeners to think about, number one, is to think about your vision board is continuing to be updated, right? So you got to think about your life path. And what do I mean by that? Work is only one sliver of your life.
Mm.
And I want you to think about how do you build your vision board and even your personal brand. So you may be connected with professional organizations that we mentioned in episode number 1, IRM, NAA, CREW, BOMA, ICSC. But I'd also like to introduce Toastmasters. I'd like to introduce Dale Carnegie. I'd like to introduce other options for you to get certificates or professional designations. Certainly in our industry, the CPM, the Certified Property Manager, or the Certified Apartment Property Supervisor, CAPS. Those are certainly two distinguishable designations. But the one thing I don't want people to get caught up in, one designation over another. What I do want you to get caught up in is planning for you to do something every single year. I try personally to have professional development, at least one very intentional course or workshop or something that I take once a quarter. Okay. And I have been able to meet that commitment to myself for many years. So I want you to think about all of our listeners. Just being a member of an organization is not going to put you at the front of the line. What puts you at the front of the line is when you care enough about yourself that you have some skin in the game, that you pay for a certification, and there's scholarships and that kind of thing. But what I'm really saying is that you have to be very intentional and complete something so that you get a micro badge or a certificate or some proof of achievement that you have taken something that was rigorous and relevant.
Amazing. Yeah, absolutely. It's I was trying to visualize the life pie there, and it's a great visual. It's just a great visual. So very, very grateful for that. And if I may add, I think beyond the certifications, the designations, there's podcasts. There's like you mention books all the time. Like I feel like there's so much other stuff that may not go on that resume that are available to you to really just absorb. And it made me happy to even hear you talking about outside the industry things. Like it's not necessarily always here. There's a lot of
Right.
lessons learned from learning from other industries. Their experiences can really help shape and mold and build our industry, from how others are doing things. So our audience may be thinking, okay, let me look at my life pie. My life pie is full of full-time work. I have a family, other responsibilities. How do you strike the balance between ongoing education, managing a career, and all the other things that come on that show up on that life pie? What are your suggestions or advice?
Well, my boundaries or my lines of my life pie are very blurry. And they're blurry from a very intentional standpoint. Because when I volunteer or I serve on a committee at the Institute of Real Estate Management, or I volunteer in another community organization or something, I'm always thinking about who's around me. I want all of our listeners to control your environment. And I want you to think about, we could talk about a garden, we could talk about a life pie, but at the end of the day, it's the people that surround us. How are we constantly being curious about finding out what does another person do? What do they like about it? What do they not like about it? And I think one of the things that I want our listeners to think about is go in there with an open mind. You
Mm-hmm.
don't have to be Judge Judy. You don't have to have an opinion about everything. Be so curious that you're able to take in a lot of information and then create independent thought. So I think that when you're balancing your own education, you have to think about what works for you. It might be that if you're a single parent and you're limited on time and you're stretched, you may just say, hey, I'm going to wake up 30 minutes early, or instead of getting on social media at night, I'm going to use that 30 minutes to take in a podcast or listen to an audible book. But whatever you're feeding your mind is exactly what is happening in your life. When I look at successful people, it's because they are surrounding themselves in a successful environment. They're putting themselves in an environment that does what? Contributes to growth. So I don't want any of our listeners to think, oh, I've got to go take a 4 hour continuing education
Yeah.
class. That might be one option, but learning, that's the beauty of where we live in our society today, is that we have more information than we could ever take in. We just have to make sure that the source is reputable and something that leads us to our goal.
Yeah, amazing advice. Yeah, it's like I, in talking to other, fellow peers and industry professionals, it's like circumstances change on a daily basis, and and we need a measure of discipline to understand how can we time block? What do I have? What are the resources available? And those may change on any given day, any given week, any given time period in our life. And just having that fundamental self-discipline to know, well, this is what I have available in order to empower myself or educate myself today, and be grateful for it. Don't be thinking, oh man, I didn't get to this, I didn't get to that. Be be grateful that you took, like you said, the 30 minutes. Pat yourself on the back and be happy about that you've been able to take that time to give yourself that level of education. So our professionals now are maybe wondering, well, I don't know the industry really well. I'm still kind of new, or I've been in this particular position for a long time. What are you noticing as far as needs in the industry or trends? Do you think that there are particular job positions or sectors that are growing, or are you're seeing more opportunities for?
Well, certainly. And I want to reference the National Multifamily Housing Council statistic
Mm-hmm.
that between now and 2035, our industry is going to need 4.3 million new apartment homes. And so when you think about that magnitude and growth projection, it also warrants the discussion of where is the talent going to come from.
Mm-hmm.
We know that build to rent, single family rentals is one of the fastest growing sectors, as is senior housing, active adult communities, the housing continuum. And it could be that you may think, well, I live in a rural town. And this is something, Jonathan, I really want us to expand on. Careers in the apartment industry are portable. You don't have to stay where you are. You're not a tree. You can move. And when you think about taking all of your experiences with you, you may say, I'm ready to move to a coastal town. What options are there? You may have vacation rentals. You may have timeshares. You may say, I want to go back to, a nostalgic time in my life when I went to college, maybe at the University of Georgia. You know, there's this whole lifelong learning. There's these college towns that are booming like crazy with an active adult market coming back to college towns. So when I think about a portable career, I want you to think about this. Number one, think more about what your gifts are, where your strengths lie, and then match them to a market that you're excited about geographically. And then let's say, maybe you live in the Southeast and you say, I'm looking to make a major move across the country. Think about more about what it is that you like to do first, and
Mm.
then go match that with the opportunity. A lot of times people will do that in reverse, and they'll see an opportunity posted and they'll think, oh, I'm interested in that. But I'm thinking, but you're not wired for that.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
don't try to put a round peg in a square hole, or a square hole in a round peg, whatever the saying is.
Yeah. Yeah. No, excellent advice. Yeah. Just think it through. Make sure that you know it's what you want. You know, I totally resonate with that. I've looked back on my career and I'm like, was that the best decision for me? I didn't really maybe think it all the way through at that particular time in my life. So very, very sound advice. So if we can, let's just pivot slightly. We've talked a lot about continuing education, but we know the property management industry is very much governed by federal, state, local laws, regulations. So how does that factor into continuing education for a property management professional?
Well, I always think about this. Number one, the legal aspects of a person in their role. Jonathan, you're an expert and a master in fair housing education through the Fair Housing Institute and others. But there are certain things that are, and I'm going to go back to the foundation again, safety, how to work safely and correctly, how to work with integrity and
Mm-hmm.
ethics.
Yeah.
And also, I think about diversity, equity, and inclusion is understanding how to deal with people and to appreciate the qualities in others that aren't like us. And so I would say that in addition to some of the technical aspects of the business, you have to think about, again, those professional skills of diversity, integrity, and even the communication. And those are the kind of career resources and educational opportunities that are going to serve a person well, not just a property manager, but Homer Rice wrote a book one time called the Total Person Program. And we have to start with an understanding of who we are and crafting our personal brand. That's not something that we spend a lot of time talking about, but your brand is what you bring to the marketplace. And
Mm,
you've got to create a valuable and an impeccable brand.
yeah. That's one of my favorite topics. We might have to have a different show about that. But yeah, I mean, there's just
We
so much
have to,
there to
right.
how you can educate and build, your knowledge and expertise to the industry. So, and thank you for like there's a very specific subjects too from a legal perspective. You're thinking of fair housing and diversity and conflict resolution and just basic people skills, understanding what is professional and what is certainly unprofessional, and in many cases illegal. Like you need to just know exactly what um, be abreast of those. And even in different housing sectors, there's a lot of different types of rules and regulations that you have to account for. So, and thank you for highlighting the Fair Housing Institute. Yeah, nice group of competent professionals that really help our industry understand. That's the big, that's the Mac Daddy, I call it, so to speak, of understanding federal related regulations when it comes to education. Very good. Uh, so to kind of bring this all together, so focus today has been on continuing education. We've talked about what we can do personally. We've talked about potential degrees, certifications that are out there. And we've talked about that life work balance a bit also. So we rely on you, Dr. Debbie. We know you have your believe and succeed cards. You speak of
Yes.
success. That you see the benefit of continuing education. How would you summarize? What would be a takeaway message for our audience who are looking at this and thinking, okay, I need to figure out, I got to get a plan here. Help them, help our audience believe and succeed. What's your takeaway message on focusing on continuing education to build their career in property management?
Well, everyone can describe or define success in their own terms. And I encourage everyone to think about, how do you want to show up? What
Mm,
really creates value in your life? For me, my gifts are helping others grow. My sweet spot is really in the intersection of real estate, education, and leadership. And in that circle is where I thrive. If you can't articulate that to someone about yourself, you need to spend time in self reflection. I tell people all the time, the best meeting you'll ever attend is the meeting you have with yourself. You need to, Steve Jobs said that it's easier to connect the dots looking backward. Think about experiences in your life that have literally just fueled your internal rocket. Think about experiences that left you flat. Think about experiences that drain the living life out of you.
Yeah.
So I want you to think about there are experiences that really complete you. What we're doing today completes me. There's things that leave you neutral and there's things that drain you. So number one, start with your own personal rocket fuel. Then think about what is it that makes that so interesting to you? Is it more people related? Is it more process related? Is it more independent than interdependent? And just ask yourself those basic questions and then start kind of creating that vision board for yourself. And keep a vision board. I'm very bullish on this. And I could show you my vision board. It's right over here on my desk. But no one knows you like you know yourself. And I want every one of our listeners to think about success is not always up and to the right if you're going to put it on a graph. Success can be very squirrely. You can go around in circles before you ever take if you've ever been in a traffic circle, there's a few different options that you could go in.
Yeah.
So give yourself enough room to grow, but start with the beginning by asking yourself those essential and important questions that you can put together on a vision board.
Amazing way to sum up this episode. I love it. Thank you very, very much. Just have that board. Know where you're going. Get yourself energized. Know what drains you. Beautiful. Thank you so much. Great part 2 to this series. And for our audience, if you haven't heard part 1, make sure you check that out on juvohub.com or on your favorite podcast station. But we thank you again, Dr. Debbie, for being here for part 2 on our special series of property management and the beautiful journey that it is. Thank you for being on our show.
Thank you, Jonathan.
And for our audience, thank you. We appreciate your support of this show, and we are very, very grateful to all of you. Until next time, class dismissed. Take care.